ওই ঘরে যাবো না, না খেলা হয় না। এখন লাগবে, আমি যাচ্ছি কি না যাইনি।
Coming back into session right now. I'll back up and just Okay. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
And we will go next to the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, for 4 minutes to resume questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zukarberg, for being here today. It's so critically important that we hear from you and your company, because we do believe that it's critically important for you to be a leader in these solutions. One thing that's been talked about just very little, but I think is very important, and I want to make sure there's appropriate attention on how the platform of Facebook, but even other platforms, and you've mentioned it a little bit, how you help us in this country keep our country safe from terrorists. And so that I've talked with lots of people who actually continue to remain very concerned about recruitment of their younger family members, and now we're seeing around the globe an enhanced recruitment of women as well to join terrorist organizations. And so I'm very, very concerned. I'm a former U.S. attorney, and so when 9/11 happened, you didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. But since the evolution after 9/11, we know that Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS has used social media like we could not even imagine. So could you please talk about, and then you talked about the fact that if there is content that is objectionable or is a danger, that people report it to you. But what if they don't? What if everybody assumes that someone is reporting something to you? So I need you to help assure us, as well as the American people, what is Facebook's role, leadership role, in helping us fight terrorism and help us stop the recruitment, because it is still a grave danger around the world.
Congresswoman, thanks for the question. Terrorist content and propaganda has no place in our network, and we've developed a number of tools that have now made it so that 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda content that we take down is identified by these systems and taken down before anyone in our system even flags it for us. So that's an example of removing harmful content that we're proud of, and that I think is a model for other types of harmful content as well.
Can I ask, though, and I appreciate, and I've heard you say 99%, and yet I didn't go out and, look for this, but yet as recently as March 29th, ISIS content was discovered on Facebook, which included an execution video. March 29th. On April 9th, there were 5 pages located on April 9th of Hezbollah content, and so forth. And so what is the mechanism that you're using? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it the 20,000 people? What are you using to, because it's not, I appreciate that no system is perfect, but yet this is just within a week.
Congressman, it's a good question, and it's a combination of technology and people. We have a counterterrorism team at Facebook.
How large is it?
200 people are just focused on counterterrorism, and There are other content reviewers who are reviewing content that gets flagged to them as well. So those are folks who are working specifically on that. I think we have capacity in 30 languages that we're working on. And in addition to that, we have a number of AI tools that we're developing, like the ones that I'd mentioned, that can proactively go flag the content.
And so you might have those people looking for the content. How are they helping block the recruiting?
Yes,
Which is still your platform, as well as Twitter, and then WhatsApp is how they then begin to communicate, which I understand you own. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how are we stopping the recruiting and the communications?
So we identify what might be the patterns of communication or messaging that they might put out, and then design systems that can proactively identify that and flag those for our teams. That way we can go and take those down.
Thank you. My time is up. I thank you, and please continue to work with us and all the governments who are trying to fight terrorism around the world.
Thank you. We will. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, before we go to the next question, there was something that I wanted to correct in my testimony from earlier when I went back and talked to my team afterwards. I'd said that if this was in response to a question about whether weblogs that we had about a person would be in Download Your Information. I had said that they were. And I clarified with my team that, in fact, the weblogs are not in Download Your Information. We only store them temporarily, and we convert the weblogs into a set of ad interests that you might be interested in those ads, and we put that in the Download Your Information instead, and you have complete control over that. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Thank you. We'll go now to a gentleman from California, Mr. Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for appearing before the committee today. The fact is, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook failed its customers. You've said as much yourself. You've apologized, and we appreciate that. We as Congress have a responsibility to figure out what went wrong here and what could be done differently to better protect consumers' private digital data in the future. So my first question for you, Mr. Zuckerberg, is why did Facebook not notify the FTC in 2015 when you first discovered this had happened? And was it the legal opinion of your company that you were under no obligation to notify the FTC even with the 2011 consent order in place?
Congressman, in retrospect, it was a mistake, and we should have, and I wish we had notified and told people about it then.
Did you think that
the reason why we didn't?
The rules were kind of lax, that you were sort of debating whether you needed to or something?
Yes, Congressman, I don't believe that we necessarily had a legal obligation to do so. I just think that it was probably, I think that it was the right thing to have done. The reason why we didn't do it at the time...
Well, you answered my question. Would you agree that for Facebook to continue to be successful, it needs to continue to have the trust of its users?
Absolutely.
Great. So does this not perhaps strike you as a weakness with the current system that you are not required to notify the FTC of a potential violation of your own consent decree with them, and that you did not have clear guidelines for what you as a company needed to do in this situation to maintain the public's trust and act in their best interest?
Congressman, regardless of what the laws or regulations are that are in place, we take a broader view of our responsibilities around privacy, and I think that we should have notified people because it would have been the right thing to do.
I'm just trying to think of the other CEO who might not have such a broad view and might interpret the different legal requirements maybe differently. So that's why I'm asking these questions. I'm also taking a broad view as a congressman here to try to fix this problem. So from what we've learned over the past 2 days of hearings, it just doesn't seem like the FTC has the necessary tools to do what needs to be done to protect consumer data and consumer privacy. And we can't exclusively rely on companies to self-regulate in the best interest of consumers. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, would it be helpful if there was an entity clearly tasked with overseeing how consumer data is being collected, shared, and used, and which could offer guidelines, at least guidelines for companies like yours to ensure your business practices are not in violation of the law, something like a digital consumer protection agency?
Congressman, I think it's an idea that deserves a lot of consideration. I'm not the type of person who thinks that there should be no regulation, especially because the internet is getting to be so important in people's lives around the world. But I think the details on this really matter. And whether it's an agency or a law that is passed, or the FTC has certain abilities, I think that is all something that we should...
Well, one of the things that we're realizing is that there's a lot of holes in the system. that we don't have the toolbox. You don't have the toolbox to monitor 9 million apps and tens of thousands of data collectors, and there's no specific mechanism for you to collaborate with those that can help you prevent these things from happening. And so I think that perhaps if we started having these discussions about what would have been helpful for you to build your toolbox and for us to build our toolbox so that we can prevent things like Cambridge Analytica, things like identity thefts, things like what we're seeing, what we've heard about today. So, I just want to thank you for your thoughts and testimony. So it's clear to me that this is the beginning of many conversations on the topic, and I look forward to working with you and the committee to better protect consumer privacy.
Congressman, we look forward to following up too.
Thank you.
Now go to Gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, sir, thank you for being here. I appreciate you using the term Congressman and Congresswoman. My name is Mark Wayne Mullen. Woman, my name is Mark Wayne Mullen. And feel free to use that name. Sir, I just want to tell you, first of all, I want to commend you on your ability to not just invent something, but to see it through its growth. We see a lot of inventors have the ability to do that, but to manage it and to see it through its tremendous growth period takes a lot of talent. And you can show, or by your showing here today, you handle yourself well, so thank you on that. And you also do that by hiring the right people, so I commend you on doing that also. You hire people, obviously, based on their ability to get the job done. Real quick, couple questions I have, and I'll give you time to answer it. Isn't it the consumer's responsibility to some degree to control the content to which they release?
Congressman, I believe that people should have the ability to choose to share their data how they want, and they need to understand how that's working. But I agree with what you're saying, that people want to have the ability to move their data to another app, and we want to give them the tools to do that.
Right. And does the device settings, does it really help you protect what information is released? For instance, there's been a lot of talk about them searching for something maybe on Google, and then the advertisement pops up on Facebook. Isn't there a setting on most devices to where you can close out the browser without Facebook interacting with that?
Yes, Congressman. On most devices, the way the operating system is architected would prevent something that you do in another app like Google from being visible to the Facebook app.
See, I come from the background of believing that everything I do, I assume, is open for anybody to take when I'm on the internet. I understand that it is privacy concerns, but you're still releasing it to something farther than a pen and pad. So once I'm on the web or I'm on an app, then that information is subject to going really any place. All I can do is protect it the best I can by my settings. And so what I'm trying to get to is, as an individual, as a user of Facebook, how can someone control keeping the content within the realm that they want to keep it without it being collected? You say that you don't sell it. However, you do sell advertisement. As a business owner, I have a demographic that I go after, and I search advertisers that market to that demographic. So you collect information for that purpose, right?
Congressman, yes, we collect information to make sure that the ad experience on Facebook can be relevant and valuable to the small businesses and others who want to reach people.
Value-based. But if I'm a customer or a user of Facebook and I don't want that information to be shared, how do I keep that from happening? Is there settings within the app that I need to go to block all that?
Congressman, yes, there is. There is a setting, so if you don't want any data to be collected around advertising, you can turn that off, and then we won't do it. In general, we offer a lot of settings over every type of information that you might want to share on Facebook, and every way that you might interact with the system. From here's the content that you put on your page, to here is who can see your interests, to here's how you might show up in search results if people look for you. to here's how you might be able to sign into developer apps and log in with Facebook and advertising. And we try to make the controls as easy to understand as possible. You know, it's a broad service. People use it for a lot of things, so there are a number of controls, but we try to make it as easy as possible and to put those controls in front of people so that they can configure the experience in the way that they want.
Would that have kept apps from seeking our information? If that's
the gentleman's time.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll recognize now the gentleman from California for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being with us today. And I know it's been a long day. I think we could all agree that technology has outpaced the law with respect to the protection of private information. I wonder if you think it would be reasonable for Congress to define the legal duty of privacy that's owed by private companies to their customers with respect to their personal information.
Congressman, I think that makes sense to discuss. And I agree with the broader point that I think you're making, which is that the internet and technology overall is just becoming a much more important part of all of our lives. The companies in the technology industry are growing.
Right, that's what I mean by it's outpaced. And I wonder, I also want to take you at your word. I believe you're sincere that you personally place a high value on consumer privacy, and that personal commitment is significant at Facebook today coming from you, given your position. But I also observe, and you'd agree, that the performance on privacy has been inconsistent. I wonder, myself, whether that's because it's not a bottom line issue. It appears that the shareholders are interested in maximizing profits. Privacy certainly doesn't drive profits, I don't think, but also may interfere with profits if you have to sacrifice your ad revenues because of privacy concerns. Would it not be appropriate for us, once we define this duty, to assess financial penalties in a way that would sufficiently send a signal to the shareholders and to your employees, who you must be frustrated with too, that the privacy you're so concerned about is a bottom line issue at Facebook?
Congressman, it's certainly something that we can consider, although one thing that I would push back on is I think it is often characterized as maybe these mistakes happen because there's some conflict between what people want and business interests. I actually don't think that's the case. I think a lot of these hard decisions come down to different interests between different people. So, for example, on the one hand, people want the ability to sign into apps and bring some of their information and bring some of their friends' information in order to have a social experience. And on the other hand, everyone wants their information locked down and completely private. And the question is not a business question as much as which of those equities do you weigh more?
I think part of it is that, but part of it is also what happened with Cambridge Analytica. Some of this data got away from us. And I'd suggest to you that if there were financial consequences to that made a difference to the business, not people dropping their Facebook accounts, then it would get more attention. And it's not so much a business model choice. I congratulate you on your business model. But it's that these issues aren't getting the bottom line attention that I think would have made them a priority with respect to Facebook. Let me just follow up in my final time on an exchange you had with Senator Graham yesterday about regulation. And I think Senator said, do you as a company welcome regulation? You said if it's the right regulation, then yes. Question, do you think that the Europeans have it right? And you said, I think they get some things right. I wanted you to elaborate on what the Europeans got right and what do you think they got wrong?
Congressman, well, there are a lot of things that the Europeans do, and I think that GDPR in general is going to be a very positive step for the internet, and it codifies a lot of the things in there are things that we've done for a long time. Some of them are things that I think would be good steps for us to take. So, for example, the controls that this requires are generally privacy controls that we've offered around the world for years. Putting the tools in front of people repeatedly, not just having them in settings, but putting them in front of people and getting and making sure that people understand what the controls are and that they get affirmative consent, I think is a good thing to do that we've done periodically in the past, but I think it makes sense to do more. Right. And I think that's something that GDPR will require us to do and will be positive.
Anything you think they got wrong?
I need to think about that more.
Well, I appreciate it if you could respond in writing. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go now to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for 4 minutes.
Right here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. This is a long day. You're here voluntarily, and we sure appreciate you being here. I can say from my own experience, I've hosted 2 events with Facebook in my district in North Carolina, working with small business and finding ways they can increase their customer base on Facebook, and it's been very beneficial to us, so I thank you for that. I do want to pivot slightly and frame the discussion in another light for my question. One of the greatest honors I have is I represent the men and women at Fort Bragg, the epicenter of the universe, home of the Airborne Special Operations. You visited last year.
I did.
Very well received. So you understand that due to the sensitive nature of some of the operations these soldiers conduct, that many are discouraged or even prohibited from having a social media presence. However, there are others who still have profiles. There are some who may have deleted their profiles upon entering military service. Many have family members who have Facebook profiles. And as we've learned, each one of these users' information may have been shared without their consent. There's no way that Facebook can guarantee the safety of this information on another company's server if they sell this information. If private information could be gathered by apps without explicit consent of the user, they're almost asking to be hacked. Are you aware of the national security concerns that would come from allowing those who seek to harm our nation access to information such as the geographical location of members of our armed services? Is this something that you're looking at?
Congressman, I'm not specifically aware of that threat, but in general, there are a number of national security and election integrity type issues that we focus on, and we try to take a very broad view of that. And the more input that we can get from the intelligence community as well, encouraging us to look into specific things, the more effectively we could do that work.
Great. Well, I'd love to follow up with you on that. It's been said many times here that you refer to Facebook as a platform of all ideas, or platform for all ideas. I know you've heard from many yesterday and today about concerns regarding Facebook's censorship of content, particularly content that may promote Christian beliefs or conservative political beliefs. I have to bring up Diamond and Silk again because they're actually from my district. But I think you've addressed these concerns. But I think it's also become very apparent, and I hope it's become very apparent to you, that this is a very serious concern. I actually asked on my Facebook page for my constituents to give me ideas of things they'd like me to ask you today, and the most common question was about personal privacy. So this is something that I think there is an issue. There's an issue that your company, in terms of trust with consumers, I think you need to deal with. I think you recognize that based on your testimony today. But my question to you is, what is the standard that Facebook uses to determine what is offensive or controversial, and how's that standard been applied across Facebook's platform?
Congressman, this is an important question. So there are a couple of standards. The strongest one is things that will cause physical harm or threats of physical harm. But then there's a broader standard of hate speech and speech that might make people feel just broadly uncomfortable or unsafe in the community.
That's probably the most difficult to define. So I guess my question is, how do you apply, what standards do you apply to try to determine what's hate speech versus what's just speech you may disagree with?
Congressman, that's a very important question, and I think is one that we struggle with continuously. And the question of what is hate speech versus what is legitimate political speech is, I think, something that we get criticized both.
Versus what's just speech you may disagree with?
Congressman, that's a very important question, and I think is one that we struggle with continuously. And the question of what is hate speech versus what is legitimate political speech is, I think, something that we get criticized both from the left and the right on what the definitions are that we have. It's nuanced, and what we try to lay this out in our community standards, which are public documents that we can make sure that you and your office get to look through the definitions on this. But this is an area where I think society's sensibilities are also shifting quickly, and it's also very different in different.
Just run out of time here. I hate to cut you off, but let me just say that based on the statistics Mr. Scalise shared and the anecdotes we can provide you, it seems like there's still a challenge when it comes to conservative, and I hope you'll address that.
I agree.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop talking.
Gentleman's time's expired. We now go to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Collins, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wasn't sure where I would be going with this, but when you're number 48 out of 54 members, you can do a lot of listening, and I've tried to do that today. And to frame where I am now, I think, first of all, thank you for coming. And there's a saying, you don't know what you know till you know it. And I really think you've done a great benefit to Facebook and yourself in particular, as we now have heard without a doubt, Facebook doesn't sell data. I think the narrative would be, of course you sell data. And now we all know across America, you don't sell data. I think that's very good for you, a very good clarification. The other one is that the whole situation we're here is because a third-party app developer, Alexander Kogan, didn't follow through on the rules. He was told he can't sell the data. He gathered the data, and then he did what he's not supposed to, and he sold that data. And it's very hard to anticipate a bad actor doing what they're doing until after they've done it. And clearly you took actions after 2014. So one real quick question is, what did change in 10 or 20 or 30 seconds? What data was being collected before you locked down the platform, and how did that change to today?
Congressman, thank you. So before 2014, when we announced the change, someone could sign into an app and share some of their data, but also could share some basic information about their friends. And in 2014, the major change was we said, now you're not going to be able to share any information about your friends. So if you and your friend both happen to be playing a game together or on an app listening to music together, then that app could have some information from both of you because you each had signed in and authorized that app. But other than that, people wouldn't be able to share information from their friends. So the basic issue here were 300,000 people used this poll and the app and then ultimately sold it to Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica had access to as many as 87 million people's information. Wouldn't be possible today. Today, if 300,000 people used an app, the app might have information about 300,000 people.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good clarification as well, because people were wondering, how does 300,000 become 87 million? So that's also something that's good to know. And I guess my last minute is, I've heard the tone here. I've got to give you all the credit in the world. I could tell from the tone, we would say the other side sometimes when we point to our left. But when the representative from Illinois, to quote her, said, "Who is going to protect us from Facebook?" I mean, that threw me back in my chair. I mean, that was certainly an aggressive, we'll use the polite word aggressive, but I think out of bounds kind of comment, just my opinion. And I've said, I was interviewed by a couple of folks in the break, and I said, as I'm listening to you today, I'm quite confident that you truly are doing good. You believe in what you're doing. 2.2 billion people are using your platform. And I sincerely know in my heart that you do believe in keeping all ideas equal. And you may vote a certain way or not, but that doesn't matter. You've got 27,000 employees. And I think the fact is that you're operating under a Federal Trade Commission consent decree from 2011. That's a real thing, and it goes for 20 years. So when someone said, do we need more regulations, or do we need more legislation, I said no. Right now, what we have is Facebook with a CEO that's mind is in the right place, doing the best you can with 27,000 people, but the consent decree does what it does. I mean, there'd be significant financial penalties were Facebook to ignore that consent decree. So I think as I'm hearing this meeting going back and forth, I, for one, think it was beneficial. It's good. I don't think we need more regulations and legislation now. And I want to congratulate you, I think, on doing a good job here today and presenting your case. And we now know things we didn't know beforehand. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I think we go next in order to Mr. Wahlberg, actually, who was here when the gavel dropped. So we will go to Mr. Wahlberg for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I appreciate you being here as well. It has been interesting to listen to all of the comments from both sides of the aisle, to get an idea of the breadth, length, depth, the vastness of our World Wide Web, social media, and more specifically, Facebook. I want to ask 3 starter questions. Don't think they'll take a long answer, but I'll let you answer it. Earlier indicated that there were bad actors that triggered your platform policy changes in 2014, but you didn't identify who those bad actors were. Who were they?
Congressman, I don't, sitting here today, remember a lot of the specifics of early on, but we saw generally a bunch of app developers who were asking for permissions to access people's data in ways that weren't connected to the functioning of an app. So they just say, okay, if you want to log into my app, you would have to share all this content, even though the app doesn't actually use that in any reasonable way. So we looked at that and said, hey, this isn't right. Or we should review these apps and make sure that if an app developer is going to ask someone to access certain data, that they actually have a reason why they want to get access to it. And over time, that we made a series of changes that culminated in the major change in 2014 that I referenced before, where ultimately we made it so now a person could sign in but not bring their friend's information with them anymore. Okay.
Secondly, is there any way that Facebook can, with any level of certainty, ensure Facebook users that every single app on its platform is not misusing their data?
Congressman, it would be difficult to ever guarantee that any single that there are no bad actors. Okay. Every problem around security is sort of an arms race, right? You have people who are trying to abuse systems, and our responsibility is to make that as hard as possible and to take the necessary precautions for a company of our scale. And I think that the responsibility that we have is growing with our scale, and we need to make sure that we live up to it.
I think that's an adequate answer. It's a truthful answer. Can you assure me that ads and content are not being denied based on particular views?
Congressman, yes, politically. Although I think what you when I hear that, what I hear is kind of normal political speech. We certainly are not going to allow ads for terrorist content, for example, so we would be banning those views, and I think that's
let me push it a little bit here, and I wanted to bring up a screen grab that we had. Again, going back to Representative Upton, earlier on, was his constituent, but was my legislative director for a time. It was his campaign ad that he was going to boost his post, and he was rejected. I was rejected as being said here, your ad wasn't approved because it doesn't follow advertising policies. We don't allow ads that contain shocking, disrespectful, or sensational content, including ads that depict violence or threats of violence. Now, as I read that, now, I also know that you have since, or Facebook has since declared, no, that was a mistake, an algorithm problem that went on there. But that's our concern that we have, that it wouldn't be because he had his picture with a veteran, it wouldn't be because he wanted to reduce spending, but pro-life, Second Amendment, those things, and conservative, that causes us some concerns. So I guess what I'm saying here, I believe that we ought to have a light touch in regulation. And when I hear some of my friends on the other side of the aisle decry the fact of what's going on now, and they were high-fiving what took place in 2012 with President Obama and what he was capable of doing in bringing in and grabbing for use in a political way, I would say the best thing we can do is have these light-of-day hearings, let you self-regulate as much as possible with a light touch coming from us, but recognizing that in the end, your Facebook subscribers are going to tell you what you need to do.
Gentleman's time.
So thank you for your time, and thank you for the time you've given me.
Yep. Now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Walters, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. One of my biggest concerns is the misuse of consumer data and what controls users have over their information. You have indicated that Facebook users have granular control over their own content and who can see it. As you can see on the screen, on the left is choice for apps, which must be on for users to use apps that require a Facebook login and which allows apps to collect your information. On the right is a screenshot of what a user sees when they want to change the privacy settings on a post, photo, or other content. Same account, same user. But which control governs? The app platform access or the user's decision as to who they want to see a particular post?
Sorry, could you repeat the...
So which app governs, okay, or which control governs? The app platform access or the user's decision as to who they want to see a particular post? So if you look up there on the screen.
Yeah, Congresswoman, so when you're using the service, if you share a photo, for example, and you say, I only want my friends to see it, then in Newsfeed and Facebook, only your friends are going to see it. If you then go to a website and then you want to sign into that website can ask you and say, hey, here are the things that I want to get access to in order for you to use the website. If you sign in after seeing that screen where the website is asking for certain information, then you are also authorizing that website to have access to that information. If you've turned off the platform completely, which is what the control is that you have on the left, then you wouldn't be able to sign into another website. You'd have to go reactivate this before that would even work.
Okay, do you think that the average Facebook user understands that is how it works, and how would they find this out?
Congresswoman, I think that the settings when you're signing into an app are quite clear. In terms of every time you go to sign into an app, you have to go through a whole screen that says, here's the app, here's your friends who use it, here are the pieces of information that it would like to have access to. You make a decision whether you sign in, yes or no, and until you say, I want to sign in, nothing gets shared. Similarly, in terms of sharing content, every single time that you go to upload a photo, you have to make a decision. It's right there at the top. It says, are you sharing this with your friends or publicly or with some group? And every single time that's quite clear. So in those cases, yes, I think that this is quite clear.
Okay, so these user control options are in different locations. And it seems to me that putting all privacy control options in a single location would be more user-friendly. Why aren't they in the same location?
Well, Congresswoman, we typically do two things. We have a settings page that has all of your settings in one place in case you want to go and play around or configure your settings. But the more important thing is putting the settings in line when you're trying to make a decision. So if you're going to share a photo now, we think that your setting about who you want to share that photo with should be in line right there. If you're going to sign into an app, we think that it should be very clear right in line when you're signing into the app what permissions that app is asking for. So we do both. It's both in one place in settings if you want to go to it, and it's in line in the relevant place.
Okay, California has been heralded by many on this committee for its privacy initiatives. Given that you and other major tech companies are in California and we are still experiencing privacy issues, how do you square the two?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So given that you and other major tech companies are in California and we are still experiencing privacy issues, how do you square the two?
What was the other piece?
California's been heralded by many in this committee for its privacy initiatives.
Well, Congresswoman, I think that privacy is not something that you can ever... It's our understanding of the issues between people and how they interact online only grows over time. So I think we'll figure out what the social norms are and the rules that we want to put in place. And then 5 years from now, we'll come back and we'll have learned more things. And either that'll just be that social norms have evolved and the company's practices have evolved, or we'll put rules in place. But I think that our understanding of this is going to evolve over quite a long time. So I would expect that even if a state like California is forward-leaning, that's not necessarily going to mean that we fully understand everything or have solved all the issues.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Dingell, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for your patience. I am a daily Facebook user, much to my staff's distress. I do it myself. And because we need a little humor, I'm even married to a 91-year-old man that's the king of Twitter. But I know Facebook's value. I've used it for a long time. But with that value also comes obligation. We've all been sitting here for more than 4 hours. But some things are striking during this conversation. As CEO, you didn't know some key facts. You didn't know about major court cases regarding your privacy policies against your company. You didn't know that the FTC doesn't have fining authority and that Facebook could not have received fines for the 2011 consent order. You didn't know what a shadow profile was. You didn't know how many apps you need to audit. You did not know how many other firms have been sold data by Dr. Kogan other than Cambridge Analytica and Innoia Technologies, even though you were asked that question yesterday. And yes, we were all paying attention yesterday. You don't even know all the kinds of information Facebook is collecting from its own users. Here's what I do know. You have trackers all over the web. On practically every website you go to, we all see the Facebook like or Facebook share buttons. And with the Facebook pixel, people browsing the internet may not even see that Facebook logo. It doesn't matter whether you have a Facebook account. Through those tools, Facebook is able to collect information from all of us. So I want to ask you, how many Facebook like buttons are there on non-Facebook web pages?
Congresswoman, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but we'll get back to you.
Is the number over 100 million?
I believe we've served the like button on pages more than that, but I don't know the number of pages that have the like button on actively.
How many Facebook share buttons are there on non-Facebook web pages?
I don't know the answer to that exactly off the top of my head either, but that's something that we can follow up with you on.
And do we think that's over 100 million? Likely. How many chunks of Facebook pixel code are there on non-Facebook web pages?
Congresswoman, you're asking some specific stats that I don't know off the top of my head, but we can follow up with you and get back to you on all of these.
Can you commit to get back to the committee? The European Union is asking for 72 hours on transparency. Do you think we could get that back in committee in 72 hours?
Congresswoman, I will talk to my team and we will follow up.
I know you're still reviewing, but do you know now whether there are other fourth parties that had access to the data from someone other than Dr. Kogan? Or is this something we're going to find out in a press release down the road? I think what worries all of us, and you've heard it today, is it has taken almost 3 years to hear about that. And I am convinced that there are other people out there.
Congresswoman, as I've said a number of times, we're now going to investigate every single app that had access to a large amount of people's information in the past before we lock down the platform. I do imagine that we will find some apps that were either doing something suspicious or misused people's data. If we find them, then we will ban them from the platform, take action to make sure that they delete the data, and make sure that everyone involved is informed.
And you make it public quickly, not 3 years. Thanks.
As soon as we find them.
So I'm going to conclude because my time's almost up, that I worry that when I hear companies value our privacy, that's meant in monetary terms, not in the moral obligation to protect it. Data protection and privacy are like clean air and clean water. There need to be clear rules of the road.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Costello, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo Congressman Collins' comments as well. Mr. Zuckerberg, I think that we as Americans have a concept of digital privacy rights and privacy that aren't necessarily codified, and we're trying to sift through how do we actually make privacy rights in a way that are intelligible for tech and understandable to the community at large. And so my questions are oriented in that fashion. First, if you look at GDPR, the EU privacy the law that's about to take effect, what pieces of that do you feel would be properly placed in American jurisprudence? In other words, right to erasure, right to get our data back, right to rectify. Could you share with us how you see that playing out, not just for you, but for the smaller companies? Because I do believe you have a sincere interest in seeing small tech companies prosper.
Yes, Congressman. So there are a few parts of GDPR that I think are important and good. One is making sure that people have control over how each piece of information that they share is used. So people should have the ability to know what a company knows about them, about who can see it, and to be able to delete it whenever they want. The second set of things is making sure that people actually understand what the tools are that are available. So not just having it in some settings page somewhere, but put the tools in front of people so that they can make a decision. And that both builds trust and makes it so that people's experiences are configured in the way that they want. That's something that we've done a number of times over the years at Facebook, but with GDPR, we will now be doing more and around the whole world. The third piece is there are some very sensitive technologies that I think are important to enable innovation around, like face recognition, but that you want to make sure that you get special consent for, right? It's if we if we make it too hard for American companies to innovate in areas like facial recognition, then we will lose to Chinese companies and other companies around the world that are able to innovate in that.
Do you feel you should be able to deploy AI for facial recognition for a non-FB user?
Congressman, I think that's a good question, and I think that this is something that probably that people should have control over how it is used, and that we're going to be rolling out and asking people whether they want us to use it for them around the world as part of this this push that's upcoming. But I think in general, for sensitive technologies like that, I do think you want a special consent.
Right.
And I think that would be a valuable thing to consider.
Two quick ones. Is Facebook, in utilizing that platform, ever a publisher in your mind?
Congressman,
you had said you're responsible for content, right? You said that yesterday. Are you ever a publisher, as the term is legally used?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with how the term is legally used.
Would you ever be legally responsible for the content that is put onto your platform?
Well, Congressman, let me put it this way. There is content that we fund, specifically in video today.
Right.
And when we're commissioning a video to be created, then I certainly think we have full responsibility of owning that content.
Which is what I think Chairman Walden's question was up front, right?
But the vast majority of the content on Facebook is not something that we commissioned. For that, I think our responsibility is to make sure that the content on Facebook is not harmful, that people are seeing things that are relevant to them and that encourage interaction and building relationships with the people around them. And that, I think, is the primary responsibility that we have.
My big concern, I'm not running out of time, is that someone limits their data to not being used for something that it might potentially be used for, that they have no idea how it might actually socially benefit. And I'm out of time, but I would like for you to share at a later point in time how the data that you get might be limited by a user, and your inability to use that data may actually prevent the kind of innovation that would bring about positive social change in this country. Because I do believe that was the intention and objective of your company, and I do believe you perform it very, very, very well in a lot of ways. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Go now to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. You're almost done. When you get to me, that means you're getting close to the end. So congratulations. Thank you for being here. We do appreciate it. You know, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the privacy, people's information and the privacy and the fact that you had this lapse. You know all about fake news. You know all about foreign intervention. I know you're concerned about that. I want to talk about just a few different subjects, if you will. And I'd like to ask you just some yes or no questions. Please excuse my redundancy. I know that some members have already asked you about some of these subjects, but I would like to ask you, Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that 91 people die every day because of opioid addiction? Yes or no? Did you know that? 91 people every day.
I did not know that specifically.
Did you know that it's estimated to be between 2.5 to 11.5 million people in this country right now who are addicted to opioids?
Yes.
Okay, did you know that the average age of Americans has decreased for the first time in decades as a result of what people are saying as a result of the opioid epidemic?
Yes, especially among certain demographics.
Absolutely. I ask you this because some of the other members have mentioned that about the ads for fentanyl and other illicit drugs that are on the internet and where you can buy them, and about your responsibility to monitor that and make sure that's not happening. I had the opportunity this past week to speak at the Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit in Atlanta that Representative Hal Rogers started some years ago. Also, we had the FDA commissioner there, and he mentioned the fact that he's going to be meeting with CEOs of internet companies to discuss this problem. I hope that you will be willing to at least have someone there to meet with him so that we can get your help in this. This is extremely important.
Congressman, I will make sure that someone is there.
Okay, let me ask you another question, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you know that there are groups of there are conservation groups that have provided evidence to the Security and Exchange Commission that endangered wildlife goods, in particular ivory, is extensively traded on closed groups on Facebook?
Congressman, I was not specifically aware of that, but okay. I think we we know that there are issues with content like this that we need to do more proactive monitoring for.
All right, well, let me ask you, did you know that there are some conservation groups that assert that there's so much ivory being sold on Facebook that is literally contributing to the extinction of the elephant species?
Congressman, I had not heard that.
Okay. And did you know that the the Motion Picture Association of America is having problems with piracy of movies and of their products, and that not only is this challenging their profits, but their very existence? Did you know that that was a problem?
Congressman, I believe that has been an issue for a long time.
It has been. It has been. So you did know that. Well, the reason I ask you this is that I just want to make sure that I understand you have an understanding of a commitment. Look, you said earlier, it may have been yesterday, that hate speech is difficult to discern. And I get that. I understand that. And you're absolutely right. But these things are not. And we need your help with this. Now, I will tell you, there are members of this body who would like to see the internet monitored as a utility. I'm not one of those. I believe that would be the worst thing we could do. I believe it would stifle innovation. I don't think you can legislate morality, and I don't want to try to do that. But we need a commitment from you that these things that can be controlled like this, that you will help us and that you'll work with law enforcement to help us with this. Look, you love America. I know that. We all know that. We need your help here. I don't want Congress to have to act. You want to see a mess, you let the federal government get into this. You'll see a mess, I assure you.
Gentlemen.
Please, we need your help with this, and I just need that commitment. Can I get that commitment?
Congressman, yes, we take this very seriously. That's a big part of the reason over all these content issues, why by the end of this year we're going to have more than 20,000 people working on security and content review. And we need to build more tools, too.
Thank you very much.
Time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Duncan for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Usually I'm last, but today I think we have one behind me that came in late. Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to...
Only by 2 minutes did he come in late.
I want to thank you for all the work you've done, and I want to let you know that I've been on Facebook since 2007 and started as a state legislator, used Facebook to communicate with my constituents, and it has been an invaluable tool for me in communicating. We can actually do in real time multiple issues as we deal with them here in Congress, answer questions. It's almost like a town hall in real time. I also want to tell you that your staff here of the Governmental Affairs Office, Chris Herndon and others, do a fabulous job in keeping us informed. So I want to thank you for that. Before this hearing, when we heard about it, we asked our constituents and our friends on Facebook, what would they want me to ask you? And the main response was addressing the perceived and in many instances confirmed bias and viewpoint discrimination against Christians and conservatives on your platform. Today, listening to this, I think the two main issues are user privacy and censorship. The Constitution of the United States and the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. No law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Nor will it abridge the freedom of speech, of the press, the right of people to assemble or address the Congress for redress of grievances. So petition the Congress for redress of grievances. I've got a copy of the Constitution I want to give you at the end of this hearing. The reason I say all that, this is maybe a rhetorical question, but why not have a community standard for free speech and free exercise of religion that is simply a mirror of the First Amendment with algorithms that are viewed, have a viewpoint that is neutral? Why not do that?
Well, Congressman, I think that we can all agree that certain content amendment, my understanding of it, is that kind of speech is allowed in the world. I just don't think that it is the kind of thing that we want to allow to spread on the internet. So once you get into that, you're deciding that you take this value of that you care about safety and that we don't want people to be able to spread information that could cause harm. And I think that our general responsibility is to allow the broadest spectrum of free expression as we can.
And I appreciate that answer. You're right about propaganda and other issues there. And I believe the Constitution generally applies to government and says that Congress shall make no law respecting, talks about religion, and then we won't abridge the freedom of speech or the press. But The standard has been applied to private businesses, whether those are newspapers or other media platform. And I would argue that social media has now become a media platform to be considered in a lot of ways the same as other press media. So I think the First Amendment probably does apply and will apply. What will you do? Let me ask you this. What will you do to restore the First Amendment rights of Facebook users and ensure that all users are treated equally, regardless of whether they're conservative, moderate, liberal, or whatnot?
Well, Congressman, I think that we make a number of mistakes in content review today that I don't think only focus on one political persuasion. And I think it's unfortunate that when those happen, people think that we're focused on them. And it happens in different political groups. I mean, we have...
In the essence of time, conservatives are the ones that raise the awareness that their content has been pulled. I don't see the same awareness being raised by liberal organizations, liberal candidates, or liberal policy statements. So I think you've been made aware of this over the last 2 days. Probably need to go back and make sure that those things are treated equal. And I would appreciate you do that. Again, I appreciate the platform. I appreciate the work you do. And we stand willing and able to help you here in Congress, because Facebook is an invaluable part of what we do and how we communicate. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I yield back.
And for our final 4 minutes of questioning comes from Mr. Kramer, North Dakota, former head of the Public Utility Commission there. We welcome your comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for being here, Mr. Zuckerberg. And, you know, don't eat the fruit of this tree is the only regulation that was ever initiated before people started abusing freedom. Since then, millions of regulations, laws, and rules have been created in response to an abuse of freedom. Oftentimes, that response is more extreme than the abuse, and that's what I fear could happen based on some of the things I've heard today in response to this. So this national discussion is very important. First of all, it's not only for these last 2 days, but that it continues, lest we over-respond, okay? Now, that said, I think that the consumer and industry, and whatever industry it is, your company or others like yours, share that responsibility. So I appreciate you both your patience and your preparation coming in today. But in response to the questions from a few of my colleagues related to the illegal drug ads, I have to admit that there were times when I was thinking, his answers aren't very reassuring to me. And I'm wondering what your answer would be as to how quickly you could take down an illegal drug site if there was $1 million per post per day regulation fine tied to it. In other words, give it your best. I mean, don't wait for somebody to flag it. Look for it. Make it a priority. It's certainly far more dangerous than a couple of conservative Christian women on TV. So please, be better than this.
Congressman, I agree that this is very important, and I miscommunicated if I left the impression that we weren't proactively going to work on tools to take down this content, and we're only going to rely on people to flag it for us. Right now, I think underway, we have efforts to focus not only on ads, which has been most of the majority of the questions, but a lot of people share this stuff in groups too, and the free part of the products that aren't paid, and we need to get that content down too. I understand how big of an issue this is. Unfortunately, the enforcement isn't perfect. We do need to make it more proactive, and I'm committed to doing that.
And I don't expect it to be perfect, but I do expect it to be a higher priority than conservative thought. Speaking of that, I think in some of your responses to Senator Cruz yesterday and some responses today related to liberal bias, you've sort of implied the fact that, well, you have these 20,000 enforcement folks. You've implied that the Silicon Valley, perhaps this was more yesterday, that Silicon Valley is a very liberal place, and so the talent pool perhaps leans left in its bias. Let me suggest that you look someplace, perhaps in the middle of the North American continent for some people. Maybe even your next big investment of capital could be in some place like, say, Bismarck, North Dakota, or Williston, where you have visited, where people tend to be pretty common sense and perhaps even more diverse than Facebook in some respects. If the talent pool is a problem, then let's look for a different talent pool, and maybe we can even have a nice big center someplace. I want to then close with this, because you testified yesterday, and the opening statement by the ranking member of the committee bothered me in that suddenly there's this great concern that the providers, particularly Facebook, other large edge providers and content providers, should be hyper-regulated. When all along, we as Republicans have been talking about net neutrality. We talked about earlier this year or last year when we rolled back the internet service provider privacy stuff that seemed tilted heavily in your favor and against them. Don't you think that ubiquitous platforms like Google and Facebook and many others should have the same responsibility to privacy as an internet service provider?
Congressman, let me answer that in a second. And before I get to that, on your last point, the content reviewers who we have are not primarily located in Silicon Valley. So I think that was an important point. And I do worry about the general bias of people in Silicon Valley, but the majority of the folks doing content review are around the world in different places. To your question about net neutrality, I think that there's a big difference between internet service providers and platforms on top of them. And the big reason is that, well, I just think about my own experience. When I was starting Facebook, I had one choice of an internet service provider. And if I had to potentially pay extra in order to make it so that people could have Facebook as an option for something that they used, then I'm not sure that we'd be here today. Platforms, there are just many more. So it may be true that a lot of people choose to use Facebook. The average American, I think, uses about 8 different communication and social network apps to stay connected to people. It just is clearly correct or true that there are more choices on platforms. So even though they can reach large scale, I think the pressure of just having 1 or 2 in a place does require us to think a little bit.
I would submit to you that I have fewer choices on the platform, in your type of a platform, than I do internet service providers, even in rural North Dakota. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I suppose you don't want to hang around for another round of questions. Just kidding. Mr. Zukarberg.
Isn't he funny?
Your staff, several of them just passed out behind you. On a serious note as we close, I would welcome your suggestions of other technology CEOs we might benefit from hearing from in the future for a hearing on these issues. As we look at net neutrality, as we look at privacy issues, these are all important. They're very controversial. We're fully cognizant of that. We want to get it right. And so we appreciate your comments and testimony today. There are no other members that haven't asked you questions, and we're not doing a second round. So seeing that, I just want to thank you for being here. I know we agreed to be respectful of your time. You have been respectful of our questions, and we appreciate your answers and your candor. As you know, some of our members weren't able to ask all the questions they had, so they'll probably submit those in writing. And we would like to get answers to those back in a timely manner. I'd also like to include the following documents be submitted for the record by unanimous consent: a letter